Welcome, deep divers. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating and sometimes pretty perplexing area: the connection between economic reality, how people feel about it, and the official stories we often hear. We've pulled together some compelling stuff for you: reactions right from the ground, expert takes, and even a look at the chatter around some recent, pretty debated official reports. Our mission today to sort of unpack this puzzle: how are everyday folks really experiencing the economy? What happens when those feelings clash, or maybe sometimes align, with what policymakers are saying? And crucially, what are the maybe surprising ripple effects when tough economic data comes out, and how do the people in charge react? You're basically going to get a shortcut to understanding the nation's economic mood and maybe some eye-opening insights into how information, or even the lack of it, shapes things.
Yeah, what's really striking here is how the sources just lay bare that gap, that disconnect that can sometimes open up between, stated policy aims and what people are actually living through day to day. We'll explore how this isn't just theoretical. It plays out sometimes quite dramatically in public spaces, and what that means for trust, not just in the economy, but maybe in institutions overall, and that can ripple out, affecting future decisions.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. So let's get into it with a really potent real-world example from our sources, one that kind of vividly shows this clash. We heard about a recent town hall down south somewhere where a congressman got, well, an absolute earful from constituents. What was really at the heart of their anger there? What was driving that emotion?
The main thing, reading through the sources, really centered on specific trade policies. And the people there, they weren't mincing words. They called these policies a terrible tax, hitting them directly. It wasn't just like a policy debate. There was this strong feeling that these things were just allowed to happen.
Yeah.
Which led to this sense of real disappointment, almost described as sadness. And that sadness, it wasn't trivial. It felt like a kind of betrayal, an economic burden people felt they didn't deserve, and that was directly tied to what the administration was doing. People were just really frustrated about the impact, whether they were already feeling it or just bracing for it.
Wow, sadness. That's powerful. So when you hear that kind of language, terrible tax, sadness, what does that tell us about the bigger picture, the public mood? Are people actually buying the administration's line that these trade measures, maybe tariffs or something, are going to help everyone in the long run?
Well, the sources seem pretty clear on this. Overwhelmingly, people on the ground are not buying that long-term argument. Not at all. Many of them had actually voted for this administration expecting something specific: lower prices for everyday stuff, a more affordable life, basically. But what they feel they're getting, especially with these trade policies, is seen as the exact opposite of those promises. The frustration comes from this feeling that the administration just seems totally unable to deliver on those really core economic pledges. Our sources mention people seeing fewer job openings locally, markets just not responding positively like they thought they would. It's not just a minor grumble, it suggests this deep feeling that the administration has kind of failed to deliver.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting politically speaking, because it's not just about one policy complaint, is it? What does this kind of visceral reaction at town halls tell us about the wider political landscape for these lawmakers, especially thinking about future elections?
Yeah, it seems like more than just a one-off thing. It feels like a trend emerging. Lawmakers going back home, they're facing some serious pushback. And sometimes when they try to explain or defend the policies, it seems to just make things worse. Now, obviously, one town hall isn't everything, but the sheer energy there, especially from opposing viewpoints, that was noticeable. And it contrasts sharply with what seemed like a lack of enthusiasm among people who used to be strong supporters in those areas. So if you connect those dots, a lack of excitement for the incumbents heading into, say, a midterm year, plus that really strong opposing energy, well, that's generally not a great sign for holding on to power. Historically, it signals trouble. It definitely raises the question: will this pressure from back home make lawmakers, maybe quietly behind the scenes, push the administration to rethink some things, especially with their own jobs on the line? It's that classic tension, right? Party versus survival.
Okay, so the town halls give us one angle on this disconnect. But our sources also get into this really controversial event linked to economic news. Specifically, the firing of a key government statistician right after a pretty disappointing jobs report came out. How did that go down, especially with political opponents, according to what we've seen?
Oh, the reaction from opponents was immediate and pretty fierce. They jumped on it, calling it things like insane authoritarian behavior. Some even made these really loaded comparisons to, repressive regimes from the past. There was one quote from a senator saying something like, "Instead of helping people get jobs, the president just fired the statistician who reported bad jobs data." that the, quote, wannabe king doesn't like.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the core message from critics, as the sources show it, is that the administration isn't just unwilling to face the tough economic reality people are living, but maybe actively trying to hide it. The reality, they argue, is that it's hard to find a job right now, that there are just not jobs available for a lot of people. And this perceived cover-up just fuels distrust.
Right. So when an administration takes a step that visible, that drastic, what does that signal about their general approach to economic problems, and maybe even more basic to just data integrity?
It definitely signals, or at least is perceived as signaling, a deep reluctance to accept economic pain, the tough facts on the ground. Critics argue it's not just authoritarian, but also cruel, like they don't care about people's struggles. And crucially, they predict it's going to backfire big time, which leads to this really vital question. If people think the administration will silence or twist data it doesn't like, how can they trust any future official reports, even if the numbers genuinely get better? The worry, and you see this across the sources, is this perception that they want to put people in place who will just deliver the right numbers, whether they reflect reality or not. And that just completely shreds public trust in all official figures. It's a serious erosion.
It really does seem so counterproductive, that firing. Based on our sources, did it just end up shining a much bigger spotlight on that negative jobs report than if they just, acknowledged it and maybe tried to explain it?
Absolutely. The sources basically call it self-defeating, even dumb. Like, it's genuinely hard to figure out the strategic thinking there. It appears to have massively backfired. Yeah, it blew up the negative report into this much bigger, more controversial story. If they just acknowledged it transparently, it probably would have faded faster. The irony is trying to bury it, put it front and center. And this touches on something really critical, not just for public opinion, but for the actual economy. You need reliable data, right? Not just for us citizens, but especially for big companies making decisions. If those companies don't trust the data on something basic like the jobs market, they get nervous, really hesitant. They might put off big investments, pause hiring, maybe hold on to capital instead of expanding. So you get this legitimate risk that the economy itself could slow down, partly just because nobody trusts the information flow anymore, which, again, ironically hurts the administration's own goals.
So bringing it all together then, these frustrated town halls, the whole controversy around the economic data, what does this pileup ultimately mean for the administration? And maybe more importantly, how does it translate when people actually go to vote?
The analysis we're seeing from the sources is pretty blunt about this. People don't vote based on statistics reports. Not really. They vote based on how they actually feel about their own situation. You can tell them any numbers you want, spin it any way you like, but if people don't feel well economically, if they're worried about bills, about their jobs, then politically it just won't work out for whoever's in charge. That personal lived experience, it always overrides the official story or the reported data. That felt reality is what ultimately counts.
Yeah, our deep dive today really has hammered home how crucial that intersection is. Economic policy, raw public feeling, and whether people trust the data they're getting. From those angry voices in town halls just echoing widespread frustration all the way to the ripple effects when people think data is being messed with. It seems undeniable that how everyday people experience things, that's the foundation for politics, for the economy itself.
And what's so fascinating is just the sheer power of that perception, isn't it? And the long-term damage that can be done when trust gets eroded, especially over something as fundamental as economic numbers. It's a stark reminder, I think, that even facts can lose their power if people believe they're being twisted. Then reality gets shaped more by feeling and, well, mistrust.
So what does this all mean for you, listening in? As you navigate all the information flying around about the economy, official reports, news headlines, what you see online, maybe think beyond just the numbers themselves. Try to look at the feeling underneath. Ask yourself, how do these policies really seem to be affecting people on the ground, in their lives, their communities? And maybe just as important, how much do you trust the sources telling you about it? It leaves you with a pretty big question to mull over, doesn't it? In this age where we have so much information, but also so much narrative spinning, what actually is economic reality?
Yeah.
And who gets to define it for the rest of us?